G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, where we specialise in helping property investors start out and scale up their property portfolios. As part of the growth and trajectory for property investors to make good quality, confident property decisions, you want to be armed with information, but also be able to take action. That's probably something that we really kind of emphasise and reiterate, not even with our podcast, but the ethos within our business as well. So in order to enable people to make great decisions, we bring in experts who we feel are kind of best in breed. And today's guest is someone that I've kind of watched and observed looking on LinkedIn, and finally had the courage to reach out to Penny Vandenhurk from Purchase with Penny. G'day, Penny. How you doing?
Hi, Aaron. I'm really well, thanks. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thanks. Now, I gravitated to you because you put out some awesome content on LinkedIn.
Thank you.
And the one that probably caught my eye was the auction over at Coogee, probably because I think we had a client actually looking at that one. And they came back on Monday dejected because I think the opening bid was above the listed price or the price guide at some point. And that feeling of dejection, which I'm probably sure that you come across to on a Monday morning, and something that we kind of hear, throughout the pre-approval process, which we'll come to in a second. But I mean, you've had a wonderful experience kind of working with inside banks, made the great bold move to step out and become a buyer's agent as well. So in our property podcast fashion, we call it the 3 Ps, a bit about yourself personally, professionally, and property journey, if you want to share with us as well, Penny.
Yeah, sure. Well, personally, I am from Melbourne originally, but been in Sydney for about 15 years.
Nice one.
Married, first baby on the way.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You are glowing, by the way. You walked in like, excuse my little bump. I'm like, no, wear that with pride.
Yeah, so it's going to be an exciting end to the year, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then professionally, so I actually started, when I was at uni, I was a conveyancing clerk back in the day, pre-PEXA and pre-electronic settlements. And I studied law at uni, went on to be a property solicitor, and then moved into banking and home loans at a couple of the big banks. Yeah. And then made the leap nearly 18 months ago now to go out as a buyer's agent, which is super exciting. Have not looked back.
Well done.
The best part about being a buyer's agent is you're the centre of the transaction, bringing it all together.
Yes.
So very much working with the solicitor, the conveyancer, the broker, the building pest people, the real estate agent, accountants, financial advisors, anyone else that's involved. Right. And you really bring it all together for the client, and that's really exciting. Yeah. So yeah, business is going really well. Fantastic. And what was the third P?
Property. So,
property,
you mentioned that you call Sydney home, so you purchase here and
so I have investment property and owner-occupied property in Sydney.
Lovely.
I'm one of those old school investors who only wants to buy in an area that I know. I freak out at like buying in other places.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Well, it's whatever works for you.
Yeah. So own a couple of properties. Next property purchase hopefully might be some sort of holiday home type thing with, a growing family. To be honest, I have a massive soft spot for Kilcare, the Central Coast. Yeah. And I also think holiday home, like you have to be within 2 hours drive of home.
It's the magic number, isn't it?
Yeah. To get there for the weekend. So that's on the horizon for next year.
I love it. So it's going to happen. Going to happen with a baby in tow.
Yeah. Well, at least I can hopefully find my own property.
Yeah, that's right. Apply your trade. There's a couple of things we want to get through, and I guess why I mentioned that Coogee auction is because one is you provide video, which I think is super helpful off the auction, because most clients that I speak to when they're heading to auction, maybe to bid, I'm like, have you attended a few auctions? No. Do you know who the auctioneer is? No. I'm like, okay, let's try and jump on YouTube, for example, and get a feel for how the auction will unravel, for example, what to expect, the pace, the tempo. Having been through it with clients, for example, having done it ourselves, I'm like, I'll tell you what, the heart rate is going, the palms are sweaty. I think it sounds like that Eminem song. And but there's a certain pace that happens at an auction, and I think you've got to know how to control it. And there was an article recently in the AFR talking about kind of how to bid or increments or wearing sunglasses. There is no hack to bidding at auction. I think there's a strategy that goes behind it. You've probably done this quite a few times. So take me through, like, let's start with the auction, because I feel like that's where we see kind of heart breaks or
absolutely.
dreams are broken.
To be honest, it's such a great tip around watching on YouTube because the auctioneers are very similar in their, they're all different between them.
Yeah.
But if you know who the auctioneer is and you can watch a couple of their auctions on YouTube, they have similar methodologies.
Yeah.
And some auctioneers will give buyers a lot of time to think through decisions. Other auctioneers want to move on quite quickly.
Yeah.
The way that they sort of work with smaller incremental bids than what they would have liked. So it can help devise a strategy based on who the auctioneer is. At the end of the day, when you're bidding at auction, you want the auctioneer to like you. You want them to give you a slight favourism. Now, their goal at the end of the day is to get the vendor the highest possible price. But you want them, when it's got to you as the highest bidder, to sell the property quickly and move on and close out the deal. So, auctions are an interesting one. I think a lot of people like auctions because they see it as a transparent process, which it is. You can see or hear what bids other people are making, and you know that those are genuine bids. And an auctioneer can make one bid on behalf of the vendor, but it must be disclosed. The challenge with auctions is you don't have a lot of control as a buyer. You can't control the vendor, and you can't control the other people bidding, and you can't control how emotional they might get.
Yeah.
And that's where auctions are designed to get the highest possible price for a vendor and get everyone emotionally bidding their last $500.
Yeah.
And so if you are at an auction, the best thing you can do is talk to the agent about how many people are you expecting to bid?
Yeah.
How realistic is the reserve compared to the price guide that you've had on the property? That's a really key one. Understanding, are those other people bidding owner-occupiers or investors? Owner-occupiers will get slightly more emotional about a property compared to an investor or a developer. They'll have a number and they'll just stop at that point.
Yeah.
And understanding, what are you going to do if the property passes into you? Because the property might not sell at the auction.
Yeah.
And so if it passes into you and you're not at your maximum price, what's your plan? Do you know how to negotiate with that real estate agent that will be there putting a lot of pressure on you?
Yeah.
And one of the things I see is people bidding against themselves at auction just to get to the reserve price. And it's very frustrating because the person selling the property, they've set a reserve, but the reserve is not the value. The reserve is their dream price.
Yeah.
And so let's just take an example that the reserve on a property is 1.5 and they've passed it into you at 1.45, so 50,000 short.
Yeah.
The agent will be in your ear basically saying you need to get to 1.5, you need to get to 1.5. But you're just bidding against yourself at that point.
Yeah.
And every auction's different and every auction has a different strategy, but you're under auction conditions till midnight. There's a lot of pressure in that moment to try and close the sale from the agent.
Yes.
But actually sometimes the best thing to do is walk away and just let it all calm down. You're still under auction conditions till midnight.
Yeah.
But also you can put an offer in on Monday. But real estate agents will come out with every story over, we have buyers who aren't here because they don't have finance ready, they can't buy under auction conditions and they want to close it out. And one thing I always say to buyers is the agent will push you until they think that you have reached your absolute limit. And so in your head, mentally tell yourself, we can't pay anymore, and just be prepared to walk away. And it's very hard if you're not a trained negotiator to make it seem like you are at your maximum if you're not. But if the agent thinks you'd comfortably pay 1.5, they'll keep pushing you.
Correct.
And so then you've just paid 50,000 more than you needed to.
Or 50,000 plus the extra stamp duty that you had to incur as well. Yeah.
And the extra interest on your loan and everything.
Yeah.
So I always say to buyers, if you feel the pressure and the heat in the moment and you're not thinking clearly, you can just walk away. There's a small risk that another buyer might come along and buy the property, but you're making a big decision.
Yeah.
And you need to make it without pressure and stress, and you need to make it with a clear head.
Yeah. Which it goes back to your very point, which is that's how the auction is kind of set up, isn't it? It's to really kind of play on the emotions. And if I'm selling a property, I want the highest possible price. When you're buying, you want to pay the lowest possible price. So sometimes they are competing priorities, but everything you mentioned there about the auction, it's it's practice, it's observation, it's understanding that number, that magic number. And quite often we see clients that maybe could have bid and they got nervous and it was that a few $1,000s left in. I was like, guys, there was juice in the tank left there as well, that they just didn't have that confidence to pull the trigger or how to confidently bid and maybe push out other buyers as well.
Yeah, and one of the challenges is that buyers really struggle to work out what the value of a property is. And if you go into an auction not confident about that, it is really hard to bid confidently.
Yeah.
And as a buyer's agent, one of the key signs that someone is reaching their maximum price or getting close is that they start talking to their partner or their family or friend who's come with them. Because as soon as people start talking and discussing, you know that they're closing in on where they wanted to stop bidding.
Yeah.
And so to work out a property's going to auction, usually it will have some sort of price guide that gives you a starting figure.
Yeah.
Not always. Some agents will position it as we're waiting on market feedback, which is, a bit useless for everyone. But what you can do is talk to the agent about what comparable sales have sold in the area. You can also research that information yourself.
Yep.
You can get access to RP data. You can have a broker or a buyer's agent run an RP data report for you that will give you some comparable sales. But look at those comparable sales. When did they sell?
Yes.
Did they sell for more or less? And was it a better or worse property? And when you think about was that property better or worse, think about the things you can't change about it. Yeah. So if one's on a main road and one's on a whisper quiet street, it doesn't matter if the bathroom was more modern. You can't ever change the main road location. So it's just about arming yourself with enough information to know where would the market on any given day price this property. Now, that's irrelevant of your budget. That's just the market. Be objective about that analysis.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I do it is if it's a house, I look at land size and price per square metre and then internal price per square metre.
Right.
And then for an apartment, similar thing. What's the price per square metre that those apartments are selling for in that block, in that street, in that suburb? And then, work out that calculation for the property you want to buy. So you've worked out on any given day it might sell for X, but I'm going to auction. And this is where if you know that there's 3 registered parties for the auction, okay, that's kind of on the lowest number that you'd run an auction. But if you know that the auction has 10 or 15 people registered, then I guarantee you 10 or 15 people are going to push the price more than 15% above what the advertised price guide is. And so the more information you know about how it's going to play out before you get to the auction, the more you can be armed with, I would love to buy it for X, but my absolute drop dead is Y.
Yeah, okay.
And you just bid so confidently up until that Y. It doesn't matter if you make 1 bid, doesn't matter if you make 20 bids. It doesn't matter most of the time if you're bidding in $10,000 increments or $50,000 increments.
Yeah.
You know what your final number is and you're going to stop dead when you get there. The only thing I would say is that $1,000 increments are typically a giveaway that you're running out of money. There's sometimes a strategy or a place for them.
Yeah.
But typically I would say avoid anything under 10,000. And, just think about where you want to end and kind of work backwards from that. So if you want to end on, 1,025,000, then make your bids all end in a 5 and just be consistent so that when you make that final bid, no one else knows that's your final bid. Nothing you've done gives that away. Whether you're wearing sunglasses, a mask, a hat, like whatever it is, you don't want people to know that that's your final bid.
Nice one. Are you, from your experience, are you trying to avoid auction where possible, or you say, look, the agent's adamant they're going to auction and there's nothing we can do to change this and we need to come with our game face on, or what's your strategy?
Yeah, great question. So prior to being a buyer's agent, I really thought auction was the way to go because it was transparent.
Yeah.
But as a buyer's agent, I've totally 180'd my view on that.
Yeah.
And so we'll avoid auction on behalf of a client at all costs.
Okay.
Partly because as a buyer's agent, you're either inspecting a property before it's come to market or on the first day of the campaign.
Yeah.
You're lining up your due diligence very quickly. So you know pretty quickly if it's on point for your client.
Yeah.
And either they're with you at that inspection or they're coming through within the next 48 hours.
Okay.
And you've done photos and a video, so you know that they want to move forward with it at least. You've got the contract off to the solicitor. You've got your building or your strata report either in the pipeline or, coming in the next 48 hours. You know what other due diligence you need to do. Sometimes it's researching bushfire zones, flood zones, development applications nearby.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff happens in that 48 hours. Well, the auction might be 28 days away. I don't need to wait 28 days for a whole bunch of other buyers to come through.
Yeah.
And so it's always based on the client's wish, but most clients understand that actually purchasing in that early part of their campaign will be more beneficial to them financially.
Yeah.
And so we do our pricing research. I talk to the agent about what interest did you have? Where is your vendor at?
Yeah.
What would an offer need to look like to get your vendor to consider it at this stage in the campaign?
Yeah.
Sometimes the agent will say, we need 2 Saturdays before our owner wants an offer. Great. We have everything lined up and come the second Saturday afternoon, go along to the open, see who else is there, who was there last week, and then be in a position to make that offer Saturday afternoon.
Nice one.
And so ultimately auctions are there to get the highest amount of money out of people. And as a buyer's agent, I'm there to help people pay as little as possible.
Yeah, nice.
And so avoiding auction is the goal. There's a couple of times where it does make sense if they have an unrealistic price expectation. So if they say an offer at this stage needs to be at this price point and it just does not stack up that you would ever pay that, you might go along to an auction with, having said to your client, I think we're a very low chance, but we'll go and we'll be prepared. The other one that comes up is where deceased estate or some sort of divorce, court proceedings,
Yes.
mortgagee in possession typically will default to auction unless there's really no other interested party. So there are times that we still go to auction, but I would definitely advise people that if you can get everything organised and lined up and arm yourself with the research, then try and avoid auction where you can.
Yeah, correct. And we see it, the price guide or there's some price feedback prior to auction and then someone comes along and blows them out the water. I'm like, they were always going to outbid you, whether it was going to auction or before that. And so where you might get those numbers that blow people away at a sale price, they either saw something in that property, whether it was close to family or school catchments, for example, and it's like all the frustration and the frustrated buyer is what I call it. Just pay whatever it is to make this pain go away. I just want to end to this nightmare, and they just pay over just to make the pain end. And so I'm like, you can't rationalize those premium purchase prices because they saw something in that property that you just didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. And that's really important to remember that the value of the property is one thing from a data perspective, but another thing from what is important to someone else about that property. Yeah. And I say that to people as well when you are looking at comparable sales.
That's right.
If you see an anomaly, call the agent and ask.
Yeah.
And just be like, hey, I saw that sold for 2.5. I am shocked.
Yeah.
Like, why? And they might say, because the person's parents live next door.
That's right. Yeah.
Like they were buying that house at whatever price.
Yeah.
It is really important to remember that people will put their own emotional value on a property.
Yeah, well said. So there's, and just talking about that, so you got there's probably about 3 or 4 different actual prices, right? So you got the listed price, the sale price, what the vendor wants, what the agent wants, and then what you're willing to pay. So there's almost like 5 different prices here. And then maybe where you see the value come in. So when you're talking engaging clients, especially early on and going, and again, they're doing this price per square meter and the property should be sitting here. Like that's great, but the agent's got a property listed here and it's actually going to sell for here. How are you unpacking the listed price versus what it's selling for and going through that pricing? I know you mentioned before about you do your numbers.
Yeah.
But it's not underquoting. I think that gets thrown around a fair bit. So take me through kind of what is underquoting and then what is actually just the listed price versus what someone's willing to pay for it as well.
Yeah, sure. So underquoting is defined slightly differently in the states across Australia. But in New South Wales, the definition is that when an agent signs up an owner of a property,
Yeah.
they have to give them an estimated sales price in writing
Yes.
on an agency agreement. Now, that can have a 10% range.
Yeah.
If the agent then takes a number less than that range and publicly puts that out there as a price guide, that is underquoting in New South Wales. So a lot of people think underquoting is it's sold for way more than what it was advertised as. That's not true.
Yeah.
Underquoting is you put on piece of paper to the vendor X and then you advertised X minus something.
Yeah.
In terms of the listed price versus the sale price, so the listed price is set by the real estate agent with feedback from their client, but it's the agent's call at the end of the day. And it should in some way reflect that estimated sales price that they put in writing to the owner.
Yeah.
And that price, it might actually fluctuate up or down during the campaign. If they get an offer, they'll generally reflect a price guide increase of what that offer is if it wasn't accepted. And similarly, if they're not getting the interest in the property that they like, then they may decrease that as well.
Okay.
And that aligns with the agent putting in writing to the client, I've revised my estimated sales price down based on feedback. However, the listing price is set by the agent. The sale price is agreed to by the owner.
Yeah.
And they're different people. And the owner doesn't have to comply with any New South Wales real estate law about advertised prices and all of that. And so that's where there's a real frustration for buyers, which is the price guide was X and on auction day, the reserve was like 500,000 above that. And buyers have a right to feel frustrated because they've wasted time, emotions, money on thinking that they could afford this property because they were within the ballpark of the advertised price guide. But on the day of the auction or when an offer comes in, the owner is actually like out of the market or a bit unrealistic about where they've set a reserve price. And so it is very frustrating for buyers. The only real ways to try and overcome that is to build a good rapport with the real estate agent and try and understand what the vendor's motivations for selling are.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll tell a white lie, but if you can find out that the owner has committed and purchased elsewhere and the property needs to be sold, you have some good confidence that they're going to have a realistic price, reserve price.
And they need this
they need
property
to sell.
sold. Yeah.
Yeah. Or similarly, if it is, a divorce proceeding, for example, and they need to sell, it needs to be done. So understanding why the owner is selling and then asking the agent, how realistic do you think the reserve will be? Like how far off the price guide is the reserve? They don't have to tell you, but there's nothing that says you can't ask those questions.
That's exactly it.
And so just find out as much information as you can from the agent beforehand. And just say, and one of the lines I use often as a buyer's guide, if I have a client where I think their budget is very, very tight on price for the value of the property, I'll just say to the agent, I don't want to waste anyone's time here. Our maximum is X. Am I even in the ballpark of where your owner wants to sell? And just see what they say. Now, I might have X plus a few hundred, couple of $1,000s more up my sleeve. I don't need to reveal all my cards, but put a number out there that is close to your max.
Yeah.
So let's say you were working on, I want to buy between 1 and 1.1, and you've seen this property and you think, I really don't think it's going to sell for 1.1. You can call the agent and say, I don't want to waste your time. My absolute max is $1,050,000. Absolute max. I can't pay $1 more, even though secretly you can pay 50 grand more. Am I wasting my time? And judge their response. It's not important about whether they say yes or no. It's about whether or not they hesitate. Because if they know their owner wants 1.3, they'll very quickly tell you, don't worry about it. But if they think that actually the owner is somewhere in the 1.1 to 1.2 range, they'll tell you, yeah, come along. And they won't hesitate to tell you, come along.
Yeah.
Now, you can't trust everything a real estate agent says. It's not about the yes or no. It's about how did they respond? How quick were they to tell you yes or no?
Yeah. Which is what your trained ear is looking for, right? When you're doing this the first few times, and I think on average, a potential home buyer is looking at maybe 30 to 40 properties but out of that 30 to 40, maybe 10% gets struck out because it's not even close to what they want, for example. And I guess we go through these law of averages going, the more properties you look at, the closer you're getting to finding the dream home. But how many of those deep conversations are you having with an agent before you actually even strike them out? So building that repertoire of negotiations taking you years and years versus some people may have only had a few months to actually have a real crack at how do I negotiate on this property as well.
Yeah, and every real estate agent is different and runs their own strategy. I have agents that I work with all the time and they're fantastic, but they run everything to auction.
Yes.
95% of their properties will go to auction. It's very hard to buy pre-auction.
Yeah.
There are other agents that love to do a deal with a buyer's agent.
Yeah.
They don't want to go on market with anything. They're just happy trading off-market properties.
Yeah.
And so knowing a little bit about that as well, that relationship.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know this, but if you're happy to put in the time and energy to find the property yourself, but you don't feel confident negotiating it, you can actually engage a buyer's agent just for that negotiation only. Basically, the point you've seen it, you've got the contract, the building or strata report.
Yeah.
Put in a call to a buyer's agent that you've been referred to or locally knows the market.
Yeah.
And just say, hey, I want to move forward on this. Can you help me negotiate it?
Yep.
And how do you structure your fee into what we end up paying?
Exactly. So you don't have to go the whole kit and caboodle. You go and look, I found the property. I need you to now go through
basically like execute for me.
That's right. Or even just turn up for bidding. I mean, some of the buyers agents will turn up to bid on your behalf. Not necessarily you've found the property, but now they're coming in at that last part to really execute, be the sniper at auction day.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone does their fees differently, but majority of the negotiation only is fee only for success.
Yeah.
You might pay a very, very small retainer.
Yeah.
But basically, if you don't buy the property because you can't afford it or someone else comes in overall, you've not paid the buyer's agent a fee. So, yeah.
I guess we're both paid
not to
for an
self-promote,
outcome.
but
no.
it is a great thing that people just don't know about.
And we're paid for outcomes, right?
Exactly.
So you and I are paid, call it performance, call it outcome, but we're driven to kind of get the favorable outcome for a client, and we don't stop till we kind of get there.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I think that's a powerful part that I see. You know, the secret weapon, which is the buyer's agent, the negotiation side, the relationships that's taken years for you to build, the reputation that comes with having good connections, getting successful properties purchased as well. That takes time and effort. That some people that are time poor, busy, lack the experience. They need to delegate that as well.
Yeah, and it's just about at the end of the day putting together the best possible deal to get you the final outcome.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is about price, but it also comes down to contract terms and making sure that you're negotiating the right terms to get the right outcome.
Yeah.
And I say that because sometimes if the buyer needs a long settlement, then the owner might actually take a lesser offer with a quicker settlement.
Yeah.
And so it's about really unpacking what's important to you, what can you negotiate on other than price.
Yeah.
I'll find out from the agent what's important to the vendor, and then we're going to put this offer together that stacks up, and it's not just about price. It is majority, but there's a lot of other things that you can negotiate in or out to give yourself a strong offer.
Correct. Well said. A lot of the stuff that you may purchase in around, say, the eastern suburbs or inner west might be strated, for example. Now, some people say, look, only buy houses, but some people's budgets don't allow them to buy a house. They've got to buy a strated property. And having had a look through some strata reports, some people just don't even know where to look, so they just delegate that to their solicitor. In your experience, what should people be looking for? What's important? What are red flags that come out of strata reports that you see that may be glossed over?
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
Yeah.
It's so boring, but I could passionately talk about it for hours, so I'll try and be concise. Effectively, what a lot of buyers do is they look at how much money is in the fund. So there's an admin fund and a capital works fund, admin day-to-day running, capital works more maintenance.
Yep.
People just look at how much money is in the fund and decide that a good amount of money means everything's fine. And that's a huge mistake to make. What's really important is that you understand how proactively money is spent.
Okay.
How much money is in the fund and how does that compare to what the annual expenditure is? So like an everyday household budget, I take a rule of you want an admin fund to have at least a buffer of 3 months worth of expenses.
Okay.
So look at last year if they spent, 200,000. Well, what's the current buffer in the admin fund? If it's $5,000, that's running pretty low, pretty tight. But similarly, if last year they spent 200,000 and the admin fund is sitting at 200,000, why? Why is there all this extra money there? Are you paying levies that aren't, the money's just not going anywhere? And with capital works, it's really important to look at, well, how much money is in the fund, but how much money needs to be spent now and how much money are they future-proofing for?
Yeah. Okay.
So often you'll hear agents on their sales pitch say, oh, there's like $2 million in the capital works fund, everything's fine. But if it's a big strata complex and it needs $3 million spent on it in the next year, well, it's got $1 million shortfall.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter that there's 2 million there. What matters is the shortfall.
Yeah.
And what I say to people with strata reports is the strata report is objective. It's just a set of facts and you need to interpret what that means for you.
Yeah.
And so it will have different financial consequences for each buyer based on if you're going to your absolute max for the property, where your serviceability is at for your mortgage. But then it will also have different risks and every buyer will have a different risk appetite.
Okay.
And so use the report to try and empower yourself for what it means for you. Now, no one who's not house hunting for an apartment is sitting out there reading strata reports. They're so boring, right? Yeah. And they range from 50 pages to 2,000.
Yeah.
But if you've never read a strata report before, in the nicest way possible, don't think you're an expert because you've read two. Either have your solicitor or conveyancer read it. You might need to pay an extra fee for that.
Yeah.
But they read them all the time. And so ask them for their advice and ask them about how that building compares to other buildings in the area of a similar age. So you can't compare a strata report for a 2010 build to a 1930s block. Like they have very different issues and challenges. So get advice from your solicitor or conveyancer. If they are not in a position to read the strata report, ask them for a referral to someone who can. Okay. Or speak to a buyer's agent who also reads strata reports all the time, and you might need to pay a one-off fee to get their advice. But they at least know red flags to look for. And I'll give you one example. If you're looking to buy in a strata complex and they've let their insurance lapse, I know that one of the things the bank asks for is the certificate of currency, right, before they'll settle the mortgage. And so if there's no certificate of currency for the insurance in the strata report, I'll go back to the strata inspector and ask, where is it? Yeah. And I've seen one in the last year where they didn't have the money to pay for the insurance. They'd just let it lapse. And I said to the buyer, we need to talk to your broker because your bank won't settle on settlement day because there's no insurance. So firstly, you carry the risk that if it burns down, you're financially stuffed. Yes. But secondly, you're not going to make it to settlement day. And we had to walk away from the property because their bank was never going to come to the party. Yeah, wow. But in that scenario as well, it can be, we talk to the vendor's solicitor about, can we get a term in the contract that says a condition of settlement is you provide a certificate of currency. Yeah. Because we wanted to try and buy it. And they weren't in a position to agree to that. But that's just one example where if you don't know to look for a certificate of currency, which you never would, you could buy the property. Most
people wouldn't even know what that means when you tell them when it's a certificate of currency, right?
Exactly right. And so, but yet you and I both know how important that is to the banks and to get to settlements. So it's that stuff where no one expects you to be an expert, but engage an expert that can give you a view on it. And also, you never want to buy an apartment and find out in 6 months' time that it's full of defects. Spot on. And you have massive special levies coming up and you would never have paid what you paid. Yeah. You maybe wouldn't have even bought the apartment if you knew. Yes. Because you're just going to have a massive feeling of regret.
Yeah. Buyer's remorse becomes real.
Totally.
Right at that point. Yeah. And it's like, because things move so fast at that front end, you'll probably agree with me. It's like, it's a shame so many times when I'm like, they find the property they're looking for and then start the finance process. I was like, guys, we had all this time on our hands.
Totally.
Why are we waiting for now when you're actively looking? Even if you're passively looking, what's the issue? Get pre-approved. That's one less thing to worry about. Then the energy goes into things like your strata report. It goes into the negotiation side, for example, goes into the actual attention to detail in the property that you're looking at, as opposed to are we even going to get a loan? And it's like the wrong emotional energies being channeled into areas where it shouldn't.
Yeah, 100%. And I always say to people, it's okay to go and get a feel for the market before you've got your pre-approval.
Yeah.
If you know that you
Pound
could
the
get
pavement.
pre-approved at, different amounts and all of that. But the point at which you're like scheduling on a Saturday to go look at properties because you think you're going to really like them, you need to be pre-approved because you don't have time.
All it takes is one listing to come up and everything will change. And by that stage, you're on the back foot.
Absolutely.
The open's already scheduled. A buyer's agent's probably already had the chance to look at it before you get there. And so when you're negotiating on the back foot, it's kind of the wrong place to be looking at it. You want to be on the front foot. You want to be organized. And that's why I think we've said it so many times, the buyer's agent proposition is there as that nudge, as that person to keep you on track, is to engage everyone else. The glue in the entire transaction is built off the back of someone that has like the buyer's agent, which has the willingness to get to the finish line.
Yeah, and the other key in a market like Sydney and other metro cities is that you need to buy and be in a position to buy unconditionally.
Yes.
And waive your cooling off, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically buying like an auction, but pre-auction.
Yeah.
Any property that's on market, generally they'll require you to waive your cooling off if you want to buy before auction.
That's right.
But even in a whole lot of other scenarios, and that can be a total game changer if you are competing with another party. If you have, in New South Wales, we call it a 66W certificate, but you can only use that if you're pre-approved.
Yes.
And the broker's on the same page about the property, the loan, the value, all of that. And that's one of the biggest challenges where buyers think they'll get pre-approved once they find the property. Yeah. And, you and I both know that bank turnaround times vary. You simply don't have time.
That's right.
You can lose a property. And a lot of buyers I speak to, they always have that one that got away because they weren't finance approved.
Yeah.
And it's just such an easy thing to get pre-approval.
Correct. Yeah. Get pre-approval, let it sit in your back pocket, and away you go shopping, and then you can revisit your options kind of when you get closer to finding the one.
Yeah. And even if you're pre-approved to a certain amount, but you find a property and it's slightly over that, going back to the broker at that point and working out those numbers is so much quicker and easier than starting from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah, spot on. One of the other things that I loved about the message that you're putting out there is buying a home and then converting that into an investment property is one, but also a 5-year vision on, can I live in this property? Will we be selling this property in 5 years' time? So take me through, let's start, then we'll come back to that other point about the investment properties. So if you're going to live in a property for less than 5 years, but more than 5 years, take me through your bit of framework on that as well.
Yeah. Well, so I always say property is not a short-term investment.
Yeah.
And when you think about stamp duty and purchasing costs, and if anyone's read The Barefoot Investor, he talks about it as well, right? It's not always the best use of money. So to buy a property for less than 5 years, I really encourage people to look for ways that you can add value to outperform the market. So in 5 years' time, the market will have moved either in an upwards trajectory, stable, or potentially a slight downward trajectory. You can't control the market and what it's doing.
Yeah.
But you can buy a property that allows you to do other things to it.
Yeah.
And so an example in Sydney, if you're buying a house, is look for something where whether or not you do this work, the property has the potential.
Yes.
You can look for, like in the inner west, I say to people, don't forgo on parking because that's a nightmare and it's just getting worse. Look for properties with rear lane access.
Yeah.
You can build a garage. You could build a studio on top of the garage.
Yeah.
Look for something with an existing attic space. You could build into the attic. Look, if it's an apartment, I encourage people to look for something with minimal strata concerns.
Okay.
But also look for something where you could redo the bathroom or the kitchen. Look for something that's currently tenanted and presents pretty poorly. But by the time you go to sell it in 5 years, it's going to be, on the agent's front page of their website because it looks so modern and schmick.
Yeah.
Now, everyone has a different appetite for doing work to properties, and you have a bit more scope if you're buying a house, but 5 years is not a long time. So what are you going to do to make money other than what the market's doing? Because if you're selling within 5 years, it's likely your strategy was that that's a stepping stone.
Yes.
So you want money because you want to buy something bigger or better that's going to cost more.
Yeah.
So how are you going to be in the best place to do that? And then if you're buying for more than 5 years, I sort of encourage people to think about what you can't change about the property and how that aligns with your lifestyle. So you can't change location, be that suburb, school catchment, although the catchment can change, but you can't change the house. You can't change aspect, but there are things you can do to improve natural light.
Yeah.
You can't change a flight path. You can't change your daily commute if you're going to have the same job for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So look for properties that align with those things. Now, that might mean that you can afford a 3-bed house instead of a 4-bed. So weigh that up over, well, what options are there down the track to turn this into a 4-bed?
Correct.
Because if you start trading off the things that you can't change about a property, it's going to feel like a really long time to live there if you don't love it. And so if you're buying for more than 5 years, buy for lifestyle, look at what you can't change, and look for opportunities to create what it is you want within your budget.
Yeah.
But just remember the things you can't change about the property. And if it's an apartment, it's more than 5 years, I really encourage people to get under the nitty-gritty about what the complex might look like in 10 years' time.
Okay.
So if it's an investor client and the block is a lot of investors, generally over time, the building won't be as well maintained.
Yeah.
And so you have to think it might not perform as well as some other apartments, that are more owner-occupier owned.
Yeah.
They just have a slightly higher, love for the building and upkeep.
Yeah.
It's not a reason not to buy it, but it's just about knowing how that fits into your strategy.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
The other part to what we were talking about before is I'm going to live in this, but turn it into an investment property. And I see this commonly, especially around Sydney, for example, where they've bought a really good property. It's like we want to hold on to it, and generally the biggest mistake is they've actively paid down the loan and has a low loan balance, and they've got no cash to buy the next home, but they want to hold on to it, which means they're drawing equity out, but it's not deductible debt. So I guess there's two parts. There's the loan strategy side, but then also the property strategy side to it as well. So what are your views on that type of strategy?
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing it a lot now with the first home buyer concessions on stamp duty,
Yep.
Which requires you to live in it for at least a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And there definitely is a place for that strategy. I've done it myself.
Yep.
With my first property that's now an investment. I think what's really key from the buy perspective is that you've run your numbers based on what that property needs to do for you when you plan to move out.
Yeah.
So let's say you think you'd live in it for, 2 years and then turn it into an investment. We'll make some conservative assumptions about what the value of the property might be, whether or not you do work or wherever the market might go.
Yeah.
And then what do those numbers look like in 3 years' time, and have that conversation with your broker.
Yeah.
If this was 3 years from now and this property was worth X and my loan was Y,
Yeah.
what could I go and buy?
Yeah.
And just really inform yourself over what is that equity, but also a conversation with your broker over, is this the right loan for me at the outset?
Correct.
Should actually I be looking at a different lender? It might not have the lowest interest rate, but it means in 2 years' time, everything's a lot easier to restructure.
Yes.
And then, know what that looks like, because buying a property to live in is not necessarily the best use of your money as an investment. But I think a lot of people, potentially myself included, we become emotionally attached to that first home we bought.
Absolutely.
And so it's hard to sell it.
Yeah.
But one of the more common scenarios I see, and I'm sure you see it on your side as well, which is people are so desperate to hold on to it, but the numbers don't stack up.
Correct.
And so they end up selling it, but almost uninformed about what could you do to make it work? Because your scenario outcome in 10 or 20 years' time will look very different financially.
Absolutely.
If you can keep it.
You've nailed it, Penny, which is they're almost forced to sell it. They don't want to sell it. And then everyone's regret down the track is we could have held it. And or maybe they sold it when they didn't have to is another one. But often it's they by keeping it, it limits their borrowing capacity to buy the next one. And by inadvertently paying down the loan, and I'll make sure that when anything we discuss is general in nature, not intended to give advice, but they've paid the loan down when it could have been interest only. They put a part all their money in the offset account, moved out, taken the cash, then go and buy their next property, but still kept the deductible debt quite high. And so that requires some type of foresight because most people think, just getting in is the biggest thing, not giving thought to maybe what are we actually going to do in the next 5 years, which seems like an eternity away at some point. But yeah, this is inadvertently the consequences of that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between an offset versus extra repayments.
Correct.
And I often say to people, like, it's not similar to how it's not always about price for me negotiating. It's not always about the interest rate.
Yes.
Like, yes, you're not going to choose 8% over 5%.
Yeah.
But there are times where product features are more important to you based on your own strategy.
Yeah.
And having an offset on a property that you live in now but you plan to turn into an investment
Yes.
is a great general advice nature strategy.
Yeah, great.
And then also thinking about, well, based on the equity I've got and where things are sitting, if I kept this property and bought in my second favourite suburb versus I sold this and I had one principal place of residence in my favourite suburb, look at what that's going to look like for you in 10 years' time. The financial outcome of having one principal place of residence in your dream suburb versus could you take an extra stop on the train or two to actually in 10 or 15 years' time be in a position to use that money to send the kids to private school or retire or buy a holiday home or whatever it is, because you'll generally just have a lot more financial wealth if you've kept that first property.
Well said. Excellent. You've got so much to offer, Penny. I want to say thank you so much. We could keep talking. I feel like the value that you're putting out on LinkedIn, your articles, the videos, keep doing it.
Thank you. It's great to know someone watches.
Oh, mate, there's plenty doing the rounds. I send it to some clients. I'm like, hey, check this out. And yep, maybe they don't have the budget to engage a buyer's agent, but like you're saying, you may be able to cherry pick the services that you use with a buyer's agent. And you may have the time and the resources to do the door knocking and the Saturday inspections, but when it comes to the negotiation side, that's really where you earn your value as well. So.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you, mate. I really appreciate it. And I hope you found that helpful as well. If you have, leave us a review. That really helps the algorithms that are, or better yet, drop us a note with some questions that you'll have answered for future episodes too. So that's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Thank you, Penny. Thanks for your ears, and we'll talk to you soon.